Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Melamed in Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemin. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry J. Chesler in Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky coming as
clowning around.
clowning around. It's great to have you. And
people say the rabbi of my synagogue is just a clown.
we are recording this on Purim, so therefore, happy post-Purim. For those of you in a walled city since the time of Joshua, tomorrow, happy Shushan Purim. Happy, what I was going to go as a Freudian slip and say happy Pesach. But anyway,
that would be Zis Pesach.
We're having a wonderful Purim and thanking everybody for being with us. We honor you. You mean so much to us. We love your comments. And we can't believe that we're getting, 3,000 views.
Wow.
I doubt it.
I've made my Purim point, all right, so I can dispense with this.
Okay, so we're talking about Parasha Ki Tissa. Ki Tissa, of course, you know what? I want to just put it out on the table. This is hard. It's a hard Parsha. It's an amazing Parsha. It's a difficult Parsha, okay? It starts off with a couple of loose ends. We got the Machasita Checa, we got some incense, and then we got a set of a coda, a kind of passage that is a transition passage between what happens, the description of the tabernacle, which occupied Truma and Tetzaveh, Truma mostly with the furniture and Tetzaveh with the clothing. And then you get this nice coda, which includes the follows. Ach, et Shabtotai Tishmoro. Chapter 31, verse 13. Ach, et Shabtotai Tishmoro. You should, I don't know how to translate ach. You definitely have to keep my Shabbat. You could do a search of ach and nefesh, right? Somehow these two words are always found together, okay? Because your soul is bound up to it. If you violate Shabbat, ushmartem Shabbat, right? Those who violate it will be put to death. So severe consequences for violating Shabbat. Have you ever had to answer this question as to why the violation of Shabbat deserves in the Bible a capital punishment? You ever have to deal with that? As some teenager, adolescent asking you and this is the way the Bible is. I'm not interested. It's capital punishment if I turn on a light for Shabbat. What's going on?
So I think one has to understand that as treason.
Yeah.
That it's described as an oath. We have the passage Visharmu right after the verses that you read. And this is a sign of the covenant between us and God. And then the verse that you read, the way that we know God is by observing Shabbat. And I think that in the biblical mind, if you don't observe Shabbat, you can't have a proper relationship with God. You're denying the core of the national project.
Yeah.
And therefore, capital punishment is appropriate because in many countries, treason is punished by death.
There are certain things that I'll just say your point, Barry, in slightly different words. There are certain things we cannot tolerate. It's a bad thing to eat pig. It's a bad thing to steal. The consequences of those actions are different than this one. The consequences of this, you cannot be part of this national project. You can't be part of the covenant if you don't keep it. Now, of course, the rabbis, generally speaking, in halakha, were like resistant to throwing around death penalties in practice all the time. And so it's not something that post-biblically you imagine put into practice. But this particular, as the rabbis understand the verse and as it is in the tabernacle context, I think that there's something, not that I want to put anyone to death, I certainly do not, but there's something that is beautiful about this juxtaposition, which is you will build beautiful spaces in which the divine presence will dwell. You will create holy space. And that's a paradigm for lots of wonderful things that human beings will achieve, but resting is more important than achieving. because the way the rabbis read this verse, why is it said here? Is you might think that because building the tabernacle is so important that it even supersedes the Shabbat. It doesn't, right? So better to have a world of Shabbat and no tabernacle, or at least the tabernacle deferred to you won't meet your timetable right away, but you cannot have a world of relentless achievement, and no rest and reflection.
Interesting. Last week we were talking after the events in Israel and Huwara, and I came across a statement by Rabbi David Bigman, who's the Rosh Hashiva of Ma'ale Gilboa, and he quoted a text from the Talmud relating to the misrepresentation of Torah, that Torah could be a poison, and I was looking for examples of how the teaching Torah can actually poison people, and in fact, I would put this passage out as an example, because if you read it unmediated by tradition, unmediated by experience, and unmediated by the lived experience of Jews, you could say, well, once I have power, and if I can constitute my state along these laws, then I would put people to death for violating, Shabbat, precisely because it's an act of treason, and I would execute based on it, and that, it seems to be a poisonous way of looking at it. And I've been saying to people, and I'm sure it's like friends don't let friends drive drunk, right? Friends don't let friends interpret the Bible literally. Okay, you really shouldn't. It's very bad, and in fact, it could be so poisonous to you. The idea that here we is this the kind of community that we want to establish? Not at all. And none of us live in these kinds of communities, and none of us, frankly, would be around if we did, because we certainly rack up a lot of sacrifices to atone for either willful or accidental Sabbath violations. But let's go to the relational aspect of it, which is evoked in the next paragraph. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat lasot et Shabbat ladorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam. So we recognize that from the Kiddush on Shabbat morning. You know what? We say it every morning, every Shabbat morning. It's such a beloved piece of text. We have the beautiful melody for it, but it does reflect that your relationship is bound up with each other in a moment when you can consecrate rest with each other. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam. It is a sign, and you're remembering, creation. You are testifying here. It's always that moment. I don't know. I mean, I have this debate with people sometimes about what's your posture during the recitation of the Kiddush.
Mm-hmm.
The evening Kiddush and the morning Kiddush. So my practice is I stand for both. Do you know people who sit?
Yeah, I sit for both. I sit for Kiddush because it's an introduction to a meal, and I don't need standing up.
So
but
I
say the paragraph standing and then sit to drink.
So the Torah paragraph,
so
right? The Vishamru and the Vayachulu.
I say the brachot.
Oh, okay. So the whole Kiddush.
And then sit.
And then sit.
I stand.
It's the reason for both.
I stand and I make the bracha. I'll tell you why I stand, because I feel like I'm testifying. Okay, so I take the stand, and the reason why I don't sit for the bracha is because I have to get up anyway for the Netilat time. Why should you sit?
Well, then you should learn to skip Netilat Yadayim too.
No.
You get all yekish and do it beforehand.
Exactly. Okay. So,
or you can become a heretic, like a good Litva.
Well, okay. So, but, and it's
I have a little thing like ot hi leolam means beni uven bnei Israel, between me and the children of Israel. Ot hi leolam. This is a sign forever. Olam, really, in biblical Hebrew, I won't say always. I could be wrong, but basically, the meaning of olam in biblical Hebrew is eternity, not the world. So Beni uven bnei Israel ot hi leolam means between me and Israel, this is an eternal sign that God created the world. I like my non-semantically correct, but I think kind of beautiful thing is Ot Hi Leolam. It is a sign of eternity, not for eternity, but of eternity. In our temporal life, Shabbat, in which we're not achieving, not building, not cooking, not burning, not planting, we're sitting. Shabbat is like the dimension. I'll get all Heschelian and say it's the dimension of eternity within time.
Very nice. Okay.
So it's important to get to the end of Vishamru, Shabbat Vayinafas, that God created the world in 6 days, and then he rested and was restored. And this is a different kind of rest. I assume that many of us get at least some sleep during the week, but the rest of Shabbat is not a rest of sleep, which we all know is necessary and maybe more necessary than we get, but that it's a kind of rest that is supposed to restore our soul. And that's why I think it's so important and so much a part of our concept of divinity in Judaism.
Nice. Well, I like the idea that it starts with ach and it ends with nafash, and if we had more time, we do the concordance search on all of that. But let's go to the next passage, which it's okay. It's heartbreaking. I mean, here they are. They received the Ten Commandments. They've got this beautiful set of instructions of how to keep God in their midst. And what happens? They see Vayar Ha'am Kivoshesh Moshe. He's just taking his time. You see, they can't wait. Boshesh Moshe Laredet Minahar. He's not coming down. Vaikahel Ha'am al Aharon. They gang up on Aaron. Elohim, make us a God. Asher Yelchu Lefanenu. And it's, I'm reading this in consecutive to the chapter that we had before, the whole glory and splendor of this sanctuary, gold and everything, and it's like there's a something presented to the imagination, and it's almost as if that creating a tangible object of worship is inevitable. Idolatry is inevitable. In the moment of experiencing the intensity of absence, you need something.
So I think it's worth considering who the golden calf is meant to represent.
Okay.
And the people's concern is that Moses has disappeared. And in a sense, what they're saying is they can't live without Moshe, which I think is the first time that they recognize that Moshe is indispensable to the way they see things. And if he's gone longer than he should be, they're in deep trouble. But the calf is to replace Moses, I think, in a sense, more than God, because Moses is the one who led them out of Egypt from their point of view, and Moses is God. And that's why they gang up on Aaron, because Aaron is definitely not Moshe. Whatever characteristics he has, he's not good enough.
I'm not sure I would agree with you. I kind of want to keep. I'm sorry. I'm kind of want to keep God in the picture. And literally, God is a picture here. God is an image here, or at least, the I have in engraved in my mind the idea that the calf is simply the thing that God rides on, right? So we've studied too much biblical history or iconography, and so you have it's the seat of God's throne, basically. And so they're not doing anything idolatrous. They're simply, presenting the throne. God's still invisible, but they're not representing God, which, that could be, but they need something. There's something is breaking forward here, which is basic human needs. Human beings need the tangible. And this is the Bible's real struggle. The Bible is trying to work this out through its history. Do people need something to hold on to? And as my late teacher, Rabbi Israel Silverman Zal, said, there's a beauty to an invisible God. The beauty of having an invisible God is that everybody gets to perceive that God in their own way. And therefore, if you condense God into one image, it's inevitable that human beings will descend into factions.
Well, we talked about the potential story being told out of order, that they build perhaps they build the tabernacle and become seduced by the power of visual images, and then take it off the rails and build a golden calf. Or perhaps there's no tabernacle and the story is told out of order, and they build a golden calf, and that's why God realizes that they need something tangible. God discovers that the God who learns, not the God that we've grown up to, think is a metaphysical perfection who knows everything. This God learns, and the people, are needy, and so therefore gives them a better version, a safer version of the golden calf in the form of the tabernacle. I feel like the story is about the ability to handle uncertainty, or at least that's one of the things that the story is about. That Moshe himself, by the way, in the course of the reconciliation with God, will say, "Hareini na kivodecha," show me yourself. And God says, I can't do that. Or rather, if I did that, you would die. Lo tuchal lirot et panai ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. You cannot see my face because no person can see my face and live. Both the people in the form of the calf and Moshe in the desire for a clear vision of the divine, they kind of need and want something to be clarified, which is an impossibility, right? In this world, the divine, which I absolutely 100% believe that there is a divine who is accessible to us in a spiritual dimension, but it'll never be one of clarity and promises and I get it. There was a medieval statement that if I knew God, I would be God, but since I'm not God, I can't actually know.
Let me ask you this question, okay? Which is, so they make the calf, right? And they say,
Well, that's one version.
Elo Elohecha Yisrael, this is your God. And Aaron sees it, Vayar Aaron Vayiven Mizbeach Lifanav, he builds an altar, and then he says, Chag L'Rai Machar, okay? We're going to have a festival tomorrow. So you're Aaron, and you're going back to your tent that night, and like, what's going through your mind?
Well, this is exactly what you said before, that it's not like they suddenly started worshiping Baal. They're trying to worship Yud Hey Vav Hey, but they also want a so to speak, throne. So perhaps what's going on with Aharon is that he says, listen, it's like the people in the previous administration in the United States. Like, why did you stay in this administration? You don't know what kind of bad stuff I restrained from having. You'd be very glad that I was working in the White House, because all kinds of bad chaos would have been unleashed if I hadn't stopped it. So maybe Aaron is saying to himself something on the order of, I made the calf as the throne for Hashem. I have to remind them, and I have to redirect their worst impulses to remind them that the chag that we're going to have tomorrow is not for the calf, it's for Hashem.
Okay. Barry, you want to take on this?
Well, it seems that in the way that you describe it, that he's stalling for time, that he knows that Moshe is supposed to come back, and he's hoping that the people will come to their senses. But as the story unfolds, it seems, the expression you use, I don't know if it was before he started recording or after, is they went off the rails. This is a complete disintegration of the social unit, that the people are going to engage in behavior that all of a sudden their inhibitions are released, and whatever moves them they will do, whether it's appropriate or not. And all Aaron can do is hope that Moshe will come back and will be able to restore order.
This is where you need a cell phone. Aaron needed a cell phone.
Nebuch, he was born 3,000 years too early.
Exactly. It's like, come down, get down here now. It's everything's falling apart. I don't want to stop it. So, don't you love it when the next verse says, Vayashkimu mimacharat? They get up early. The people are so excited. They're so excited. It's first time in 40 days that they've had something to be excited about. And
this is their first holiday.
This is their first holiday, right?
No, it's their second holiday. They had Pesach.
They didn't have Pesach. They didn't.
They were on the road.
They had Pesach.
they vaya'alu olot. They offer
Actually,
burnt offerings.
let's
Vayagishu shlamim. They're
well,
having
let's actually
feasts.
turn that one back, because that's interesting. I think it is their second holiday, but the first holiday was, we got to get out of slavery. It's absolutely terrible, and that was great. And this one is, it just comes in. We're in the desert. How in the world are we supposed to have a holiday in the desert? Um, the leader, dear leader, seems to be,
AWOL.
vanished, AWOL. So I think that there's a kind of like, I'm not apologizing for the building of the golden calf. Terrible thing that happened. But I think you can feel the anxiety of the people. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, there's 3,000 people that Moshe executes for this piece of idolatry. As we are reading this on Purim, we all know, or perhaps we don't all know, but I'll tell you if you don't know, that the Megillah, which is this like very funny. It's like there's all kinds of aspects of it that are like a sexy farce, and it's a satire, and it's all in good fun. But then at the end of the Megillah, of course, the Jews take retribution on their enemies, and they kill 500 people in Shushan and 75,000 people throughout the kingdoms of Achashverosh. So if only 3,000 people of 600,000 people left Egypt, I mean, the Bible, we have a way of reading it that the numbers kind of go in one ear and out the other. We don't really pay that much of attention to the numbers. But if you just take the numbers as a baseline from which you compare story A to story B, 600,000 males 20 and up leave Egypt. Maybe there's 2 million people in this throng, not really 2 million people, but the story that's being told is, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, and 3,000 people get executed for the calf. It's actually kind of a tiny percentage. What's going on here?
Except for the families that lost them.
Yeah, but if what we're saying is, oh my goodness, Am Yisrael built the golden calf while still at Mount Sinai. Maybe the story that the Torah is trying to tell us in the numbers is that a tiny fraction of Am Yisrael built the golden calf while still at Mount Sinai.
Well, let's talk about that. I think so. It's a rupture. It's a rupture moment, and whether it was one person or 3,000 people, the fact that there was blood spilled on this, and it almost seems that the conflict is leading to that. It's the tragic outcome of this, that there's blood spilled, and then it has to move to another phase of reconciliation, which I think is really what the second part of the Parsha is all about. There's a way of how to take all the broken pieces here, because the golden calf episode becomes the moment of fracture, the rupture in the relationship. How do you rebuild that relationship? And so there's a war, there's blood spilled, there are 3,000. That memory will last forever in the Jewish people. I mean, to this day, Yom Kippur, harkens back to this, and of course, the covenant of compassion and forgiveness harkens back to it. And so we'll move to that point where Moses has to beg God for forgiveness, and he does, and he wants God to show himself to him. And I hear the passage I want to really kind of focus on is when after all of this, God says to Moses, look, these people are just too difficult. And I'm going to refer to chapter 33, verse 3. I'm going to take you up to the land, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. My malach is going to take you, my angel. I'm not going to go with you. I'm not going to go with you. I'm not going to go up with you. Because you're such a rotten people. Pen achelcha badara. I'll get so angry, I'm going to consume you in this. And that moment, it's so interesting. This is what God says to Moses. I guess it's a private communication, like, Moses, your people, they're awful. I'm not going with you. And the people hear this, and they get so upset. They hear this, and they go nuts. They go into mourning. They tear their clothes. They don't want to live like this. And then just fast forward, which is, go to chapter 34. After the moment of catharsis, God says, sorry, I'm sorry. It's Vayomer na im na matzati chen beinecha Adonai. God, please, yelechna Adonai b'kirbeinu, come and be with us. Ki am kshe'orefu, because this is a really difficult.
Maybe you can, the particle ki famously has like multiple meanings in it.
Yeah, go ahead.
But, because, behold, and maybe the one you just read is even though.
Even though, right? Okay, so God, be with us, even though they're awful. Forgive us our iniquities, our sins, and take possession of us. And I find this is the drama here. It's really, in simpler terms, it's the relationship is broken, and yet we want a relationship.
You used the word before. I don't remember if you used it on the call or when we were preparing. You used the word fractured.
Fractured.
And that's a better word here than broken, because like if you said that a relationship were really broken, you mean like it's at the end, maybe
It's at the end.
It's fractured. It's seriously wounded. Seriously wounded. And yet, Moshe, I mean, we said this before, Nechaltanu, forgive us, Salachta lavonenu lechatatenu, forgive our sins and transgressions, Unechaltanu, and take us as a possession, as a nachala. And that is just like the central part of this, is that, we still want to belong to you. We fail, and this is human. God is infinite, and the demands of worshiping God are infinite, and following God are infinite. People are finite. They are always going to do this in flawed ways. We are finite, but take us as your own anyway. And the three of us, of course, each of us has four children, and many of our listeners will feel this too. You love your children so much, and you know that they're imperfect, and you know that they're flawed, and they're still your children. And so that's what Moshe is saying to God, is still treat us this way.
It's the picture of a religious life, or the theological picture, the spiritual picture, is that God's relationship is with people who are not perfect, and that the aspiration for perfection is really not here. It's the aspiration for just trying to be a little better, right? This relationship is a very complicated relationship. When you have the all-consuming God, who, if you kind of, as we said, if you stepped over the wire on Shabbat, you could suffer execution in the biblical framework, unmediated. Okay, this is serious business, and this relationship is serious. And so, how do you live with that kind of terror? You can't. So it's almost like saying, "Look, take us as we are. We are finite. We are imperfect. We are flawed. We sin. We can do terrible things. So the only way to live in a broken or fractured relationship is with a constant potential for forgiveness." If that's a compelling reading here, that forgiveness here, I guess I would say, is the proposition is that forgiveness, the possibility, and this is not Yom Kippur, it's Yom Purim. Forgiveness is so essential.
So I don't know, though, that at this strata of the Bible, forgiveness is a real possibility, because it seems that it's a later development of biblical thought.
But it's here. It's the salachta lavonenu.
Well, but it's not forgiveness necessarily in the sense of wiping the slate clean, which is how we identify forgiveness today, right? When we leave the shul on Yom Kippur, we think we have a white slate. All our sins have been wiped away. And here they're not wiped away. They still have to be reckoned with. But I want to suggest something. When you were reading the Hebrew, what struck me is the word that I don't know that we paid enough attention to before, and that's B'kirbeinu. God will not be in our midst, but it doesn't mean he's going to be God. He'll be off to the side, because Moses is going to move the Ohel Moed out of the camp, And that's where Moses will commune with God. So even though God will not be in the center of the people, which was the original plan, he'll still be with the people, although at a little distance.
At a little distance, and he has to be mediated by Moses, who, for all intents and purposes, is, the person that is most equipped to handle that. God,
I
it's
want
not,
to go back the other way a little bit,
Go
though,
ahead.
and say to Barry, I don't entirely agree with what you said about the forgiveness thing, because there's a way I could read the story. It goes like something like this. Moshe, God says, "That's it. I've had it. I've had it. These people stink. I'm done with them. I'm going to start over with you." Moshe says, "No, no, 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 don't do that. You know, remember Egypt, and they'll laugh at you, and remember this covenant, and give them another chance." And God says, "Okay, but I'm not going to go myself. I'm going to go send an angel." And Moshe says, "You can't do that. I really need to know who you are." And perhaps either Moshe has to remind God of who God is, or to be a little bit, maybe to foreground God in this story. Maybe God has led Moshe to this spot cleverly, planning it all out, so that Moshe will say, "Harinina kvodecha v'hodienina drachecha," show me your glory and teach me your ways. And God says, Adonai el Rachum v'Chanun. Who am I really? I am gracious and Rachum, merciful, Chanun, gracious, El Erech Apayim, tremendously patient, Rav Chesed, abundantly kind, Be'emet, faithful, etc. Doing kindness to 1,000 generations, Nosei Avon v'Fesha v'Chata'a, and I forgive all this sin. And let's pause a minute on how we parse the sentence. Either Moshe has induced God to remember, or God has induced Moshe to ask, such that God can proclaim, "Ultimately, I am the God of forgiveness." And then we're able to say, okay, so you've been saying that people are Am Kshei Oref, that they're so stiff-necked. Even so, because you are El Rachum V'Chanun, you are the perfect God for forgiving them. Now, it is true also, you use the phrase "wipe the slate clean," which obviously you have in mind the fact that the Bible text says "v'nakeh lo yanakeh," which means idiomatically, I will not wipe the slate clean. I will keep a punishment, but it will be a measured punishment. But the way we do it in Judaism, the way Rabbinic Judaism has placed a period in the middle of a sentence, which turns "will not wipe the slate clean" to "will indeed wipe the slate clean."
Okay, but as you'll agree that the rabbis do that, not the
Yes, that's
authors of
true,
the
but
Bible.
that's
Okay,
Judaism as
but
opposed to.
I would offer two things here. First of all, I agree with what you said about God. I think God is very sharp psychologically, perhaps more so than Moses can ever be, because I think that it's clear that God wants to get a reaction from Moshe. Moshe has to keep the people as his people. That's God's primary concern. Moshe cannot abandon the people because God doesn't have a lot of other candidates here to replace him. And God, in the sense, talks too much, because if he really wanted to destroy the people, then you do it. You don't talk about it. You only talk about it if you want someone to react to it.
but God,
But there's
God,
no reason, that's basic, that's literary theory 101.
all right, but
That's
I only
So,
react to it because it's like God has an intense love of the ancestors. It's like, I loved your father. Your father was such a great guy. Abraham, but your dad was great. Okay. And because of your dad, I'm gonna keep my covenant.
right. But what is he saying? He's telling Moshe, you know what? You may think you're not so great yourself, but you have to remember you had great ancestors and they could carry you through when you have failed.
I
But
think
I
he's
want to
only
return to Jeremy's comment at the end for a moment.
so
So the question then remains, what is the punishment for the golden calf? So is it just the 3,000 people that the Levites kill and the people having to drink the bitter potion of the ground up golden calf? And I'm a little unfamiliar how you ground up gold to get dust, although you should see the movie Paint Your Wagon if you haven't. But or is the punishment God moving outside of the people's center? And then I agree with you, there could be some forgiveness because the punishment lasts. And my understanding is that in the Bible, if there is a sin, the sin has to be expiated by punishment. And the punishment can be delayed, as we see in the book of Kings, but it cannot be forgiven completely. That comes much later.
Okay, so our time is coming to a conclusion here, but I want to just kind of ask a question, which is that this reality, or this kind of understanding of where God is so different from the way the rabbis perceive it and the way we live it. You know, Rabbinic Judaism already will deal with the sense of absence, the divine absence, and construct an idea, I think an idea that we all live with, which is that God can be present. God is present when you study. God is, Shechina Shruya Benenu. God is present at points of transcendence. That God is present. We could argue that even in the virtual sphere, in a chavruta of three, there's the sense of God's presence is palpable when you stand, as we did for Kiddush, or you sit for Kiddush. The moment that you make that bracha, maybe there's God present, or maybe the moment that the candles are lit for Shabbat. And I know many people experience this, or many of our viewers may, the one moment of peace that they feel the presence, and they can only identify it as God is with them, that they light the candles, they wave their hands, they cover their eyes, and in that moment between the lifting of the hands, there's that just moment of peace, that moment of tranquility. Is that Shechina Shruya Beinenu? And is that our religious experience? Unlike what is here, that God is absent and fractured and ruptured, and
that is Shabbat Shalom. That's the peace of Shabbat that we hope will last the next 25 hours.
Indeed. That's why this is such a difficult parsha, friend.
And just to add, Shalom is one of the Kinuim, one of the names of God.
Indeed, indeed. This is the way it is. Shabbat Shalom. A good way to end our time together, and a wish for everybody, and a thank you. Thank you to all the people that have made their 35 minutes dedicated to this conversation. We are so happy and so grateful for your time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.